This is an RNZ podcast.
They say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm Kathryn Ryan, and here we draw on my conversations with experts on 9 to Noon to help you navigate family life. Tips for parents on keeping your cool when parenting a difficult child. Education consultant and parenting coach Joseph Driessen says it's understandable when parents give in to anger, frustration and even depression. But he says overreacting and responding by either being authoritarian or overly permissive are not the way forward. So Joseph's here with his toolkit for breaking the cycle and starting afresh in a new way. Good morning, Joseph.
Good morning, Kathryn. So nice to talk with you. Lovely.
Yes, thank you, and welcome back. What are the situations that you've got in mind here?
I've got the going back to first principles, the research shows that actually one of the greatest predictors of child well-being is actually the parent upskilling themselves and reacting in a methodical and calm and sort of professional way to the child difficulties. And the less the parent does that, the more they get annoyed and angry and sad and depressed, the more likely it is that the child's behavior will deteriorate. So what you have is that some parents, they do their best, but they might have a child which is more difficult than the other children, or the parent is unaware that the child is, that they themselves are driving it. And they get into a cycle which gets worse and worse. So, for example, a typical example I get in my seminars and parent evenings is where a parent says, "Well, you just described me," where I just got more and more angry and more aggressive with my child, and I realise I've got to be the person who changes. Or it could be a parent who is actually quite depressed. There is a relationship between child's misbehaviour and parent depression. Because it's a cycle, the parent just feels so despondent that they can't alter this relationship or change the behavior, and they feel quite depressed. Or a third thing is some parents isolate themselves because the child is misbehaving in public and birthday parties, and they become quite isolated and they feel criticized and marginalized. So there are downsides to having a difficult child, and some parenting really needs some advice on that.
What we're talking about also are strong emotions in a parent and how they're affecting them.
Yeah.
Which is always a challenge, to feel them, but not to let them drive what happens.
Yeah. But sometimes you can't help your feelings because they just arise. But feelings do arise from perceptions and how you frame things. And so if you think that your child ought to be perfect or shouldn't have this disability or shouldn't have these overreactions, then you'll be annoyed every time they do it. But if you actually see them as a child which has got neurological or a temperamental issue which they themselves actually can't deal with very well, then you become much more patient. It's a bit like a child who say he's got a busted knee and you realize that they can't do this and can't do that. So reframing your thoughts is actually the key to stop your negative reactions. The other thing about that is that some people believe that the child makes me angry, and by venting my anger, I feel better. But really, that is very, very short-sighted. Nobody makes you angry. You yourself decide to become angry, to feel better. But anger doesn't help like that at all. So what I'm proposing that to get out of these cycles is that the parent becomes much more deliberate, and actually starts to realize, okay, things are not going so well. So what can I do? And I just thought I'll share with you the research, which is the steps which successful parents do. And the first one is actually to take time out and from the situation and to reflect by yourself, or ideally with another adult, your partner or your wife or husband or your friend or anybody, not seeking advice, just being allowed to talk about it. And then to have that person become a little bit of a support person, so you can go to them and say, well, it's just still not going well, and we'll have lunch together, etc. But the research shows that a parent who's got outside support, they are in a much better position to take charge of their relationship. Part of that, of course, is that some parents should actually realize I need to go to a parenting course. And like the Incredible Years or Positive Parenting, they are really good. The research shows that, for example, parents who go to Positive Parenting or the Incredible Years, that they make a major shift in their parenting insights because they're beautifully well presented with great facilitators, videos, clips, and you can see, wow, that is, my parenting actually is quite sort of in the dark ages in some ways, and that will help you a lot. So that's what I suggest. A, find a person to support you, and B, go to parenting courses. Then I would go down the track of let's become much more objective and professional and much more on the child's side. Now, that sounds really weird. The child is really naughty, inverted commas, and difficult. But actually, most research shows that a child is difficult because they can't help it. The cognitive or emotional demands on them are outside their capacity to cope. And actually, their misbehavior is basically a cry for help. And once you understand that and sit down with them and say, well, how can I help you? Then you go onto a different path. And that deliberate path is very, very effective. And so what I propose, so to summarize then, so find an outside person to help you, form a sustained relationship of where you can get some counseling or support and help, or talk with your partner or etc. Go to a parenting course if you can, or Google and read the books in the library, etc., etc. And then become quiet reflective. And I've got 5 or 7 steps for that reflection.
Let's get into them. What's the first?
Well, the first thing is to make actually resolution to yourself that you are part of the problem. That is, even though it's a very difficult child, that your responses have been not quite good enough. That is not your fault. But you've got to recognize, well, let's not continue this. Let's make a change. So some people actually have to make a significant moral and, dare I say, spiritual or emotional commitment to saying, I'm going on a different path. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to go yelling and screaming and get emotional and nag and helicopter parent and do this and do that. I'm not going to do that. That's the first thing. Once you've made that decision, then you're going to say, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And the first thing is to analyze your child, to say, now, without that child, and think, well, what situations are causing the problems? What is the issue? What are the triggers for this child? And then make a list of what are the issues and which of these are really, really important. Like you might say, okay, he doesn't eat broccoli and refuses, no matter how many times I pinch his nose and shove it into his mouth. I'm making it up, But what I'm saying, that's not a major issue, as long as he's eating. But what about if he constantly harasses his little sister? Well, that has to change. So you make a list of, I want these things to change. And then once you've done that and you talk with that other person and say, well, shall we narrow down to some significant things? Think outside the box. What can you do differently than what you've done in the past? And the first thing I would suggest to you, that much of the misbehavior of a child is attention seeking. And the first thing, I've talked about this before, is to actually start making a list of positives about the child and start noting them and start giving the child positive proactive attention. That's the first thing you do. It's like shoring up a house which is of faulty foundations. So you give them attention and you don't use too much emotion. You say, well, just let's hang out together, or let's play a game together, or I'll read a book while you do this, or let's watch for TV, or go for a walk, or take out for lunch. I'm just hanging out, And the second thing is start looking at the good things, because the research shows that some parents become so gun shy for the bad things, they've stopped actually noticing the good things. And you start making a list. And some parents are very surprised when I ask them, what is good about your child? And there's a long hesitation, which is quite sad, wow. And then they say, oh, well, actually he's very friendly and he's a great communicator. And the list gets longer and longer. And the reason is that their negative behavior of the child has crowded out the positive vision, and the child is in a cycle of being constantly criticized. And so you start saying, and then you start saying it. You make a little habit for yourself, a little checklist at the end of the day. Have I said at least 4 or 5 nice things to my child? And unemotionally, emotions often don't do it. It's just the fact that I like the way you did this, and thank you for helping me there, and you made a big improvement. It's good. Keep it up. So that you're reorientating that. Then Yeah?
No, I'm
Can I
listening.
carry on?
Keep going.
Then I would suggest something quite radical, and that is you want to stop saying anything negative. You can reframe all negatives to positives. Like you can say, you're teasing your child, your sister again, or you didn't do your homework. You could also say, I noticed that you got your homework books out. That was that's an improvement. Shall we make another little improvement? You can also say, I don't like what's happening to you and your sister. You can be so kind so often. So let's see if we can do that a bit more often. And then when that all blows up, you say, well, that was a bit of a blip in the plan, wasn't it? We try to be a little better. And so you try and put the child into a positive frame of mind. And some children, they need a lot of this. Some children, because of their inadequate neurology or their problems, they get so much negative feedback, their self-image is changed, and they see themselves as bad. And when the adults start saying, no, you're not, you're a good person, it's just making a few little errors, you minimize your language in the negatives, and you accentuate where you're growing, you're doing your best, you've made a little mistake, let's do it again. So the second foundation is to reorientate the child to, you're growing up, you're finding it a bit difficult, but it's not too bad. Then the next thing is to start talking to the child as, I'm on your side. I know what you've done is not so good, but I'm on your side. And so how can I help you? And can we reflect together what makes it worse for you? And it's very interesting when you talk to a child very calmly and say, how can I help you? Then all of a sudden, the child sees themselves not being attacked by the adult, but in fact supported by the adult. And that changes their orientation. And they might say, well, maybe I shouldn't be let's pretend, maybe I shouldn't be in the same room as my sister before dinner when we're both hungry. It just doesn't work. And you say, well, why don't we just separate you then? You live and have a time in your separate bedrooms, and I'll talk to your sister and organize that. That is, you try and find out in a collaborative way, how can I help you? I'm on your side. I'm your loving parent. And then what I suggest is that you coach that child better strategies. Your better strategies, how to do this, how to do that. And you keep on coaching them. You say, well, let's pretend we had an agreement that you would not sit in the same living room as your sister, and so let's keep on doing that. And so remember, when you come home after school, etc., would you mind just going to your room and read your book there or play with your games there, but not in the living room, etc. So you keep on coaching the agreed strategies. That will gradually work. And then finally, what I suggest to you, to the parents, is that you want to not do the reflexing punishments too much. What the research shows, that a lot of parents, they just habitually punish, and the child just becomes gun shy. What in fact you should do then, in that case, you should say, well, I want you to make it up, what you've done wrong. And so I'm going to ask you just to have a think about it, come back tomorrow morning and tell me, what can you do to make it up? What chore can you do? What effort can you make? It's not saying sorry, it's doing something. And that strategy works. So I call it the 5 steps of healing, the 5 steps of healing a child's sort of malfunctioning behavior. And that is to stop the behavior, to stay calm, to reflect together and say, how can we as a team work together to help you, to coach a child better, and then to ask the child to make it up. Now that is a world apart from an angry, aggressive, depressed parent not knowing how to deal with the child.
You need to keep reinforcing this. It won't be linear progress.
No, you're totally right, Kathryn. In fact, what you should see it as landing a plane in Wellington Airport. Like when the pilot is landing the plane in Wellington Airport, it dances around, it bumps, it's going up and down, and it seems quite a horrendous experience. But actually, the pilot is just on a glide path down. So if you picture a glide path where the child gradually gets a little bit better, less intense, less problematic, further apart, and gradually you're landing that plane. And so you might say, well, and you've got to ask yourself, is the child improving? If they're improving, I'm doing well. It's going well. Okay, there'll be blips. There will be relapses. Relapses are inevitable. It's a gradual process.
You do still use some things like a withdrawal of privileges or timeout if they're needed.
Yeah, they should.
But
yeah,
as they're
you
needed.
as they need it, but I would say without emotions, and I would be quite reflective with the child and say, well, let's talk about what happens when they're calm, and what shall we do when you make a mistake, and you're a bit grumpy, etc., etc. What should we do? What do you think? Shall we? Here's a list of privileges. Shall we take some of them away, or can you choose three, or shall I choose three? And so you play a game where the child actually collaborates with you. And most children, when they're calm, are very rational. They say, well, and you've got to say there are rules. They've got to be fair. I've got to treat you the same as your sister or your brother. And so, just like in society, I can't break the law, and nor can you. And so how can we do that? And then often the withdrawal of privileges, make it short and brief, and but don't add a layer of disapproval. Just say, oh, well, you made a mistake, and this is how we make it up. So, you can't if you're pudding tonight, or, you're not allowed to play with your iPad for the evening. And then you say something positive. Say, I think you're taking this very well. You're very mature, and tomorrow we'll start again. And so you do that on a systematic basis, but not reflexively. You're bad. We're withdrawing this privilege, and then there's a cycle of anger and aggression. That's not the way to do it.
Okay, two similar questions that I'll give you
Yep.
at once. This emailer, absolutely useful info for parents, but how do we get the same message to teachers and principals? The message my difficult child was getting every day at school was, you are naughty, nothing to do with his neurological condition. Second, could Joseph advise on how to get others on board with this approach, e.g. older siblings that also have a negative attitude to a naughty child?
Teachers and I spend my whole life teaching teachers, and so we do a lot of coaching, and there's a lot of a huge sea change in the school about these practices. But on the other hand, a teacher teaching 30 children and one child is chronically misbehaving, after a while it becomes very wearisome, and it's hard for them to kind of not become negative. I think the best thing is to talk with the teacher and sympathize with them, say it must be really hard, and how can I help you as a parent? And I would, as a parent, actually say, well, can I help you? If you want to keep my child in after school, I'm only too happy to support you in that. And so the teacher must feel supported by you rather than attacked. And then you can actually say, do you realize that, let's pretend he's got ADHD. You can print out the checklist of ADD and ADHD. And do you realize that neurologically he's just, I know it's not easy for him, not easy for you, not easy for me, but shall we work as a team and gain that sympathy and empathy? That's my first step. For your family, you need to do the same thing. For your siblings, as a parent, you've got to say, well, as a team here, you've got to have a meeting with them. And you say, as a team, we've got one of our brothers and sisters who is difficult. How can we as a team help each other to kind of survive and do better? And again, you allow them to vent their feelings, their anger and annoyance, etc. And you can ask them, how do you think I can do better as a parent? But then say, can we manage them better as a team? Can we brainstorm some strategies we can teach him or her to help them to cope with their difficulties? And you'll be amazed when you do that, when you co-opt the family or the children, how positive that can be. On the other hand, sometimes you just have to be quite, in a sense, be the kind of authoritative parent and saying, in this family, we care for one another, and just because your brother is difficult, I don't want you to tease him or anger or put him down, and let's move away from that.